let's talk about the cylinder recirculation model. It's a model of distributing LPG in a safer way. But to join me in the studio to have a conversation on that is Obed Crane Boachi, the head for gas commercial regulation at NPA, and Mohammed Abdul-kudus, no, not your kudus, you know, and he's head of communications also at the NPA. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We've heard about cylinder recirculation model over and over again because there are ads all over the place. And the message is that it's a safer way of distributing LPG. But you tell us, what this is really about and what gave rise to it? I'll start with you, Mr. Boachi.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for having us on your program this morning. So the cylinder recirculation model, as you rightfully mentioned, is a model of distribution of LPG, particularly when it comes to household use. And so somewhere in the year 2013, the Ministry of Energy was promoting LPG, and we sought to incentivize the service providers to bring filling stations into peri-urban and rural areas. So what we did was we distributed cylinders and stoves in rural areas to whip up the appetite for LPGMCs to then go in there and set up refilling stations. But then we realized that this was not done, setting up of the filling stations was not done. And so when the consumers finished using the cylinders, because of the long distances to refilling, they stopped using the cylinders. And so we decided to start thinking of how we could bring LPG to consumers without having to dole out huge sums of money to invest in cylinder refilling stations. And so we looked around, and then we chanced on the cylinder recirculation model just across the border in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Okay. That's what they do. In fact, it is being done in several countries. In Brazil, India has about 99% penetration to the cylinder recirculation model. Okay. And so we looked around, and we thought the cylinder recirculation model was something we could look at. And so from 2013, we started to prepare a policy that will seek to improve the distribution of LPG in Ghana. We prepared the policy, and then way down the line in around 2017, we got approval from Cabinet to implement the policy. If you remember, or if you would recall, that was when the atomic incident happened. So most people think it was the atomic incident that
gave rise
led to the CRM. But then the policy had been in preparation all this while. And we were preparing the policy in partnership with all the relevant stakeholders, that is the LPG marketing companies, the Chamber of Bulk Petroleum Suppliers, as well as the transporters and all the other key stakeholders in the industry. Okay. And so when Cabinet give us the directive, give the MP the directive to implement the CRM, they also tasked us to set up an implementation committee that included all the relevant stakeholders. And that's exactly what we did. So we came up with an implementation committee that had the LPG Marketing Association on the committee. We had the bulk distribution companies on the committee. The Association of Oil Marketing Companies was on the committee. The transporters were on the committee. We had civil society organizations such as Imani Ghana also represented on the committee, members of parliament. In fact, it was a broad committee of all relevant stakeholders. And so all of these stakeholders came together, and we prepared the framework in the sense of how we wanted to implement the cylinder recirculation model in Ghana, considering we have service providers already and we have existing infrastructure already. Okay. So that's what we did in coming up with the framework of how we wanted to go about this.
In this framework, does the implementation affect the already existing service providers in any way?
In fact, implementation has to be based or has to be done through the existing service providers. Right. So what we did, for instance, was look at the existing infrastructure and see how we could utilize the existing infrastructure and also the existing service providers. So somewhere down the line in 2019, 2020, we started piloting the cylinder recirculation model. Okay. Although bottling plants are key in implementing the cylinder recirculation model, we didn't have bottling plants at that time. We just had one, and we didn't want to create a monopoly, so it was not operating. Okay. So what we did was we utilized the existing refilling stations to mimic the role of the bottling plant. And so I remember we piloted it in Kadi, for instance, where we had some filling stations. For instance, there was a Trinity gas station where the NPA procured cylinders because the LPG marketing companies expressed that they were not able to buy cylinders. Under that model, under the CRM model, one key thing is that the consumer does not own the cylinder. The cylinder is either owned by the LPG marketing company.
Yeah, some of the pictures are actually rolling on your screens right now.
Good.
So then let's talk about costs and benefits. And let me come to you, Mr. Kudus. What is the cost to the consumer? What is the benefit to these service providers who already exist and who you say you're working through? You're implementing this strategy through them. Yes. Talk to me about cost and benefits then.
Okay, so let me start with costs. It does not actually come with any additional cost. Okay. For many people, they were thinking that because there would be other layers to the already existing structure. For example, the inclusion of the bottling plants, then the cylinder manufacturing companies, because the structure as it pertains within the downstream is that for every layer that is in a certain structure of a service rendering, there would be a margin to cater for the kind of investment that that particular layer is actually providing. So take for example, the fuel stations that we go to fill our vehicles from. The dealer has a margin inbuilt in the price build-up. The marketing company who supplies the product to the dealer has a margin. So at any time a structure is introduced into the already existing structure, a margin is automatically introduced to cater for the investment that you have actually put in there. So for many people, because the new structure is going to come with the bottling plant and the cylinder manufacturing companies, and knowing that they would have a certain component of margin as a measure of having their return on their investment, people were anticipating that there would be a rise in their costs, but obviously not at all. We've actually been very innovative in the introduction of it to make sure that there is no additional cost, because we all know
the team or the state is actually absorbing whatever extra cost might, come up in the implementation of this policy?
Not necessarily. So the previous ways of importing LPG into the country is to give license to the PSPs who want to go and bring them to bring. But then we realized that, okay, there's a certain advantage to economy of scale. If we're able to aggregate the needs of each BDC, for example, and then put it to auction, to allow one person to go and bring it. Certainly, if I were to go somewhere to go and bring a product, I probably would have a certain advantage if I'm buying it in bulk than to fragment it, you understand? So that particular innovative activity gave us a reduction in the premium. So in some instance, we had as high as $70, okay, reduction from $100 initially that you pay as a premium, okay? So that helped us in compensating for the addition that we brought on board relative to the activity of the bottling plant and the cylinder manufacturing company. So that's why we've not seen a transfer of a certain cost to the consumer. So there's no additional cost to the consumer at all. The structure remains the same.
That sounds like good news to consumers.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So, aside that and the safety issues, that this is bringing aboard, why should citizens, consumers, actually patronize the cylinder recirculation model? I'll give you each a minute to speak to us directly. Why our audience, Ghanaian citizens, should actually patronize or should get on board with the cylinder recirculation?
So the critical one you've actually raised is the issue of safety.
Right.
For many people, it is a barrier to their willingness to use LPG as a method of cooking in their homes because of the related accidents that are reported every now and then. And so cylinder recirculation is coming with a certain factor that reduces significantly the possibility of the accident. The reason for the accident a lot of the time is when the gas is able to escape from the cylinder. Okay, and study has shown that the reason for which the gas is able to escape a lot of the time is because of the faulty nature of the valve that is in the cylinder. And cylinder recirculation model actually takes care of this, because ordinarily the consumer would have to regularly change it anytime you go to fill.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes, regularly.
That's what happens.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you, and I've said this thing elsewhere, and I want to repeat it, because if you go abroad, okay, the population that uses LPG is almost about 9 out of 10. Okay. When you come to our part of the country, it's about 3 out of 10. Okay. Yet we have more of the accidents than they do. Why? It's because of safety mechanisms that we do not probably pay a lot of attention to. Okay, and that is why CRM is going to help in addressing. With CRM, the valve would be changed irregularly, not at a cost to the consumer, but at a cost to the marketer.
Thank you for that. It's enlightening. Yes. Mr. Watch, what would you add to that? In a minute, make it brief for me. We have to go in a minute.
So, convenience. I mentioned earlier that with a CRM, now you do not have to set a refilling station in a community, for instance, in a village, before you can bring LPG to them. there are teachers, there are nurses, there are people who are in these villages or these areas that can afford LPG. But because of the magnitude of the cost of setting up a refilling station, we don't have them in these places. Yeah. But with CRM, by just placing a cage, which is not expensive, you can bring a few cylinders there for people there to also access LPG and use. And even in our cities, you usually find people carrying cylinders going 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers more, or sometimes putting it in the taxi to go and fill cylinders to bring it home. And at the CRM, the cylinder exchange points will be all around us. In the supermarket, you can find a cylinder exchange point. At the fuel station, you can find a supermarket. In your community, at a convenience shop, once the MPA inspects and finds that location safe to place a cage, you can have a cage there just behind your house. And so when you're cooking and you run out of gas, at a short distance, you can just walk and get gas without having to travel long distances. So it will bring a lot of convenience to consumers as well.
Convenience, safety, some freebies in there for you. That is a cylinder recirculation model. Thank you so much for shedding more light on this, Mr. Obed Crane-Boakye, Head for Gas Commercial Regulation, and Mohammed Abdul-Kudus, also Head of Communications, both from the NPA. Thank you for joining us for breakfast.
Thank you.
Well, there's still more coming your way on the AM show. There's a conversation with NCCE. You want to stay for that. I'll be right back.